I was also inspired by non-literary mediums. You know what I mean? Like I was inspired by video games. I was inspired by
Yeah.
movies. There's so many ways to tell a story. And I think instead of like when people dismiss certain things, like dismiss anime as you're a weeb, or that's geeky, or this is childish and stuff like that, you're missing out on a learning experience.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Conversation with Nadine Matheson. As always, I hope that you're well and I hope that you've had a good week. And if you can believe it, we have already completed the first month of 2025. We're in February. It just goes so quickly. You start the beginning of the year thinking, oh my God, January is so long. I don't know how I'm going to get through it. And it's cold and it's miserable. And then all of a sudden it's done. And here we are in February. And the days are starting to get a little bit longer. Just a little bit. Not much. But spring will hopefully be on the way. Anyway, one of the most fun things and the things I love about this podcast is the fact that I get to speak to so many different authors and I'm introduced to them in so many different ways. Some authors I know already. For example, I've met them at festivals and we've just become friends over the years, or they're introduced to me by their publicist, or I find them on social media. And the author I'm talking to today, Sarah Raughley, I discovered her on Threads and I saw her posting, and then I saw her post her amazing cover for her new book called The Queen's Spade. And she put out a post saying, does anyone want to talk to me for their podcast? And I was like, absolutely, yes, I do want to talk to you. So I got in contact with her. And here we are. She's my guest today on The Conversation with Nadine Matheson. And Sarah Raughley, she's the best-selling author of YA fantasy novels, which include the best-selling Effigy series. And she's now moved into historical fiction. And her new book, The Queen's Spade, she describes it as Queen Charlotte as a revenge thriller. So the Bridgerton fans out there, they're going to love it. And the one thing I loved about my conversation with Sarah is that one way or another, I'll find a way to put in a Star Wars reference. So there's a Star Wars reference in there. And we were talking about the importance of paying it forward as Black writers. And there were several moments in this conversation where if you saw me, my mouth was just wide open, jaw dropped, because there are things that she revealed about her career and her experiences as a writer that just both baffled me and outraged me. But it's so important for you to hear this conversation. So this week, in addition to the jaw-dropping moments, Sarah Raughley and I talk about having to address the same old questions about diversity in publishing, the importance of writing books with Black heroines and also Black characters as the love interest, and the switch between wanting to write and needing to write. Now, as always, sit back, we'll go for a walk and enjoy the conversation. Sarah Raughley, welcome to The Conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Right. Sarah, I didn't mean to get quite deep with my first question, but I think what it was, today in the UK, there's a publishing magazine called The Bookseller, and it had an article. And and I call it it's the annual article where it says, diversity has fallen down in publishing and there's numbers are low, across the board, inside, outside. And I tried not to roll my eyes, but I just rolled my eyes a bit because I'm every year without fail, there's this announcement. Right. So, looking at all the books that you write, writing, I'll say children's books and YA fantasy books, how important is it for you to be able to tell these stories?
I mean, it's important, especially because of what you've just said, right? It's these constant yearly, oh, we're not there yet. And it's well, when are we going to get there then? And they keep kind of saying this as if it's out of their hands, right? The publishing industry continues to talk about diversity as if it's something that is just going to happen out of nowhere, or it's something, whereas they have the direct power. They have the power to promote our books. They have the power to push, you know, certain authors and to not push certain authors, to support our works, to publicize and market our works, not just to buy it and put it out there, but to market it so that people know that they exist. So I kind of sometimes feel like publishing kind of pretends as if they're not the ones that are impeding progress when they are. And if they want, like, I think that there are plenty of readers out there that want, you know, books with Black heroines, but they just don't know that certain books exist, right? Or publishers aren't doing enough to actually reach those particular readers. The only thing that I can do, I mean, I've always been tearing my hair out about this, because I can't control what traditional publishing does, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I can scream about it. We can all scream about it to the rafters, but ultimately they're going to do what they're going to do. So the only thing that I can do is just continue to write my books and put them out there however I can and try to reach readers however I can. Because I know that there are readers out there that need to see Black heroines, you know, and they're just not
Yeah.
being taken seriously.
I think I sometimes say that you get bored of like talking about it, like kind of talking about diversity, and then you kind of roll your eyes when you see the reports come out, because it just seemed like an annual event. It's almost like Christmas. It's like, you know, it's gonna come around and it's going to be the usual, what can we do? And I'm like, you asked this question last year. It's like, you know what needs to be done.
You know what needs to be done, you're just not doing it. So like, what else? There's no other conversations that need to be had, because people have already said, like, this certain things need to be done. It's just that the people with the power to do it aren't doing it and don't want to do it. You know what I mean? So what else? What can I do as an author except continue to write my books and continue to, you know, promote other Black books and books with, you know, people of color in it, but especially books with Black heroines. Because I think, as we've seen, you know, diversity is like sort of a catch-all term.
Yeah.
But not everybody within that sort of, I guess, within that category is treated the same by publishing. And maybe that's a difficult conversation to have, but I definitely think that, you know, when I put my energy into promoting diversity, I especially put extra energy on promoting books with Black authors and Black characters.
I don't know if I saw it on Threads. It might have been on Threads. Yeah, it was last night. And someone had posted, and I couldn't work out whether the person who'd posted, I think they were Black, but they were saying, and it was to do with like I say acting roles. And they were basically saying, you know, that black people shouldn't take on what is a traditional right. Well, I can't even get my R's out. Shouldn't take on a traditional.
It's fine. It happens to me all the time.
And I looked at it and I just thought, I don't know. I don't actually agree, because if you're able to play a role, then you should be able to step into that role and become that character. But then I also understand the other side of it, which is, I think some people are saying in the comments that, well, you know, create more Black roles. But I don't think there needs to be like a complete, you can't do this and you can't do that sort of thing. And I think sometimes you get that same argument with readers sometimes, when they say, well, how can you have like a Black character as a heroine in a fantasy novel? And you're like, well, why not? It's like, it's fantasy.
I hate telling Black people or anybody telling us that we can't do something. I hate the word can't, because and I often try to understand, like, where is that coming from? Is it a place of malice? Is it coming from a place of not wanting to see Black people, period? Because I think there are some people that just don't want to see Black protagonists in anything. And they don't want to see Black heroes in fantasy, in romance, in horror, in books, in movies, in TV. And it's just no, like I'm for honestly, like I can sort of understand why some people would say like I don't want to see a black actress take on a role that's not like a black character, only because I know that that black actress is going to get a lot of hate.
Yeah.
Um, like what's going on with what went on with The Little Mermaid, what's happening now with I think How to Train Your Dragon, et cetera, et cetera. But we'll get hate regardless. You know what I mean? Like even if we are playing a quote unquote black role, whatever that means, we're still going to get hate. Like we always get hate. So who cares? Like
This is how I felt. I think this is why when I looked at it, I was just like, what? I'm like, I think my immediate response was, I do not have time for this because this is just playing into a narrative that's being created. And I think you should be doing everything you can to go against that narrative. Because when I think back to how I grew up and the books you saw on the
mhm,
shelves and who was on the covers of those books, and you love the stories, of course you love the stories, and you fall in love with the stories and you fall in love with characters, but irrespective of what color you are, you want to see yourself in some shape or
absolutely.
form. Even if you're watching Star Wars, you want to know that you can be, well, for me, I want to be a stormtrooper,
Sure.
but one who can aim correctly, not a badly aiming stormtrooper. But I want to be a Jedi. Why can't I be?
Exactly. Yeah. And we saw what happened with the acolyte. It's like I don't want black women to settle
Mm,
for going back into the shadows. And I feel like we've always been in the shadows, or we've always been placed in certain like roles, and like, oh, you can't have that kind of role. And sex, especially, colorism and featureism also plays a part. Like dark skinned women, women with certain features, um, like mine, right?
yeah.
African, and it's like, oh, you can't be the heroine, or you can't be the love interest, you can't be this and that. I hate the word can't. So I say like, let them be angry, but push us everywhere. And that's why, I write the books that I write. And, you know, I was recently in an emergency meeting with other Black female um, writers,
Mm,
authors, of different genres and different markets, like young adult, middle grade. This was after Trump got reelected. And of course, there was an emergency meeting where we were all talking about, like, what are we going to do now? Because, with Trump being reelected, does this mean there's going to be this more like conservative push against our books, banning our books? Are publishers going to tighten their budget and say no more Black books? Because we know that the pendulum swings, right?
yeah.
Like during the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020, they were all for buying Black books. And then, they weren't, when those books came out, they weren't like publicizing those books and things like that. And I think what I came away with that meeting with was, you know what? Even if it means that I'm no longer going to be in quote unquote traditional publishing, even if it means that I'm no longer going to be publishing my books through the traditional means, I'm still going to find a way to tell my stories. And those stories are going to have Black people in it, especially they're going to have Black heroines in it, come hell or high water.
Mm.
And it will find the people who need those stories.
The interesting thing about, I say, the Trump, and anyone who follows me on social media or just knows me personally, I've been well into my news detox since the
Oh yeah,
election.
oh
So like, yeah, like
yeah.
I don't want to hear about it. I'm like, I'm not interested. Just let me just carry on with my life. But you're talking about having a meeting with other Black female writers, and I'm saying funny. Funny is not the right word, but it wasn't just contained in just, I'll say, just like North America and character. I had the same meeting with
Mm.
other Black and female writers. And I said, and that's in England, that's in the UK. And you wouldn't think whatever goes on over there is not really going to affect us in that way. But it does, because I think as a Black person, you don't just take on what happens to you personally. It's like you kind of take it on universally. Like your whatever your
For sure.
struggles are across the ocean. It's like you take it on because you can see how it affects you. So we had the same meeting because in a sense you can't, as well as protecting your work, you have to protect yourself. And when it feels like kind of everyone's against you, you have to do that together.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the struggles, I mean, I'm Canadian.
Mm,
So what was happening in America, I mean, it's still, there are some people that talk to me were like, well, this is an American issue. Why are you worried? You know, but this has to do with the entire world. What happens to
yeah.
America is and make possible certain things in the entire world. And you know, like I'm in my news detox as well, but unfortunately still, you know,
Things
slipped
filter
there.
through.
Things filtered through, and I heard like, oh, Trump was musing about making Canada the 51st state, and I was like, okay, whatever. And I went back to watching my anime, right? I was like,
I saw that this morning and I was the same thing. I was like, you've got to, I'm like, I did not have time for this. And we had a similar story, but it was to do with Elon Musk. And I'm doing something with one of our, I say not my politician, one of the politicians over here, and getting involved. And I just thought, no, just let me just
yeah,
pick up my comics. I have comics. Let me just read
exactly.
those.
Like I'm done. I'm done. But it's
Yeah.
like we all felt it, I think.
Yeah.
I think especially Black women. That's why I'm like Black women across the diaspora and on the continent. I know that like this year especially it feels like there's been an increase of like us versus them in
Mm,
different places. Like, oh, you're Canadian or you're from the UK, therefore you don't understand this experience and that experience. And there's been like some diaspora wars and stuff like that. But I always say, you know what, we're Black women. We share, like, there are differences absolutely in our experiences, in our material realities, in our lived realities, but there are things that we all share as
mm.
Black women. We all share a specific condition. And that's why we all felt it, you know, when Trump was reelected again. I, that's, I can't even describe how I felt. That's why I was like, no more news, no more anything. I'm done. I'm tired. And that's me in Canada. It's you in the UK. It's people, it's Black women in America. It's Black women on the continent, in the Caribbean, so on and so forth.
Yeah. It's,
So it's like, I'm not surprised that everybody was having their own meetings like across the
and it's the
world.
thing, you didn't think that would have been the outcome. And in a weird way, I'm not saying it's not good that it happened because it's definitely not good that it happened, but in a weird way, it's good that we ended up being connected in a completely different way, and also
Mhm.
recognizing, you know, the things that we share, but also the ways in which we are so different, and also the way in which our creativity expands into so many different things, which is why I always say, like a broken record, like we're not just one story, and that we can tell and write more than one kind of story. So when I see you, this is why I saw you on Threads, and I saw your book cover, and I'm like, oh my God, literally, it's like it's back. No, it's amazing because God, if I had been, I'm saying like 12 or 13 growing up, and I saw that on the shelves, this book cover, bright red of this black young woman on there as a queen, I would have been like, oh my God, let me just I don't even care what it's about. Let me buy it. Let me persuade my parents to buy it because I want to read it. And I think that's what's been like a good moment, seeing what everyone's capable of doing.
Absolutely. You know, the Queen Spade, again, like it's those connections because I'm Nigerian, I'm Yoruba
Mm,
specifically, and I was born and raised in Canada, but I found out about Sarah Forbes Bonetta, who was this Nigerian Yoruba girl, a princess, who was taken to Britain in the 19th century to be like a present for Queen Victoria,
yeah.
and was her sort of goddaughter. And there's so much of me in this, in that, like, this is somebody from my tribe, from my, from my ethnicity, and at the same time, like it's connecting British history. Of course, Canada is also like it's part of the British Commonwealth and
Yeah.
all of that stuff. And I have family in Britain, and it's like these stories, we don't hear about them. We don't hear about them at all. I
No,
never
and
knew.
no, but I'm saying we don't hear about those stories. I mean, I knew about her, and I don't know if it was my dad who told me. My dad's very good like that. But then when you talk about you being Nigerian, I'm being Grenadian, and like our histories in itself, they're so rich with storytelling. So there are
Absolutely.
there are stories. You're constantly surrounded by stories like at home from your family, friends or family. And then it's a strange thing to leave your house. And it's weird. Also, it's always used to say to people, it's like you go into your house and I go back into my house and I step into Grenada because
Mm-hmm.
now that's your family. And it's weird to leave that comfort zone and step back out and you're like, oh, you're not seeing yourself. And you're not hearing fun, not and not the trauma. I call them the trauma stories. You're not hearing the fun stories. Like you want to hear
Absolutely.
about a little black boy jumping on the dragon,
I
doing
mean,
whatever.
my first book series, the Effigy series, is basically like a play on Sailor Moon or the Winx
Mm,
Club, if you're into that kind of thing. It's like, yeah, why can't a Black girl just, have powers and have fun and be in this sort of like epic adventure? And, my second book series with Simon and Schuster, the Bones of Ruin trilogy, was about an African tightrope dancer in 19th century, and she had like it was kind of like X-Men. They all had
mm,
powers, and that doesn't mean that like I do talk about certain things, like colonialism and stuff like that. But it's also this big, comic book like epic adventure, and the Queen's Spade, which is coming out January 14th, it's not fantasy. It's a thriller, a historical thriller, but it's very much like if you're into Bridgerton, if you're into just revenge thrillers, if you're into like just a black villainess owning her power and like taking revenge on people. It's just a lot of fun, like and there's so many different kinds of stories that Black women can be in.
mm.
So I want to just continue to find a multitude of stories that we can be in, just put it out there. And again, it may be, a book that you can find on the shelf, or it may be something that's self-published. You can buy it, online, or it could be something that I just put up for free, but I'm going to continue to put my stories out there.
When did you realize that you wanted to write and that you needed to write? Because I think we can have an idea like, oh, I enjoy doing this, I enjoy the storytelling, but I think there's a switch to that
Mm-hmm.
moment of no, I need to be writing and telling these stories and somehow getting them out there.
Oh man. Yeah. I mean, I've been writing stories since I was a little kid, since I was like 3 or 4 years old. I've been telling stories because I have two older brothers who are really into like comic books. I
Mm,
think I became into comic books like DC, Marvel, that kind of thing because of them. And I was introduced to stuff like anime and manga because of them as well, and video games. And I just realized that there's so many different types of stories that you can tell, and I was seeing different kinds of stories from different kinds of cultures, you know what I mean? And I was like,
yeah.
wow, I want to do something like that. I want to tell stories like that. But of course, like I don't think I really got a sense that I could really actually sit down and write a book until I was confident enough to do so. And that's when, I started university and I started like really studying literature and not seeing the kind of books that I wanted to see. I was learning like the canon and Shakespeare and, American authors and Canadian authors and really great stuff, right? Like from the literary giants, Toni Morrison and things like that. But it's like I wanted to see again like Black girls going on adventures, and I want to see like Winx Club type stuff. You know what I mean? Sailor Moon and Final Fantasy and this and that. So I was like, okay, if I can't find these books, then I have to write them.
You know what I love about
So
this conversation is that, like growing up, I feel like similar to you in a sense. I got two brothers, even though I'm the oldest, and we got our comic book, I say, addiction from like our dad and our uncle. And I remember like we'll go to our uncle's house and he'll be collecting the comics weekly. So we'll just be going through his comics. And then when he was, I don't know why, when he was getting rid of them, he gave them all to us. And I buy comics. I love comics. And I think at one point I thought I must have been the only Black British girl buying and reading comics. And it's weird. I've come in my 40s and it's only in my 40s I'm saying there's so many of us. There's so many of us who just love that whole genre. And I always used to say to people, for sometimes I think there was the perception it was childish. And I'm like, comic books, anime, manga, it's in no degree is it childish. And I said, if you want to know how, I always say, if you want to know how to tell a story, how to maintain a story, the continuity of a story over a period of time, and also how to develop characters, because you can have such amazing character transformations from someone who said a little weakling, scared of their own shadow, who take on this enormous power. So if you want to see that, I was like, comics is one of the best ways, one of the best mediums to learn about that.
absolutely. I learned a lot, in terms of and maintaining a fan base over that long period of time.
Yeah.
It's like, well, they're doing something right because, when you take a look at what's selling right now in American publishing, manga and anime or manga and graphic novels, which would be considered childish and so on and so forth, is actually selling more than I think like young adult. It's selling more than adult, selling more than, middle grade books and so on and so forth. So it's like they have to be doing something right. And when I think about like the manga that shaped me is like you can't read something like Hunter x Hunter, you know what I mean? Or even something like with real emotional resonance and say like, oh, that's childish.
It's not. I remember. Sorry, go on.
No. Like I can name like so many, but it's like even something that you consider to be childish, like oh Naruto, and he's like you read the whole thing, read the manga from beginning to end. You read some of those like moments where characters are dying or something like huge, just going like emotional moments. It's like I'm not even seeing that in some a so-called adult
No,
novels.
it's so
So
true. One of my good friends, she WhatsApped me like I'll say middle of the night, and I'm like, what's happened? It's like, oh god, I've forgotten the name now. Not Naruto, the other one, Jujutsu Kaisen.
Jujutsu Kaisen.
Kaisen, right? And she's like,
Yeah.
I can't believe I've come to the end of it, and I'm like, you need to like take control of yourself, but the emotion. But I'm joking, but I understand it because art, good stories, they can create that emotion. And it says you're right. Sometimes you're like you go through a whole book, you go through 350 pages of a novel, and you're like, I was looking for something. You didn't give me anything, and I feel cheated at the end of it.
There's so many different ways. There really is so many different ways to tell a story. And that's why like when I say like, oh, like when people ask me what inspired you to write, it's like, yeah, there are books. There are books that inspired me to write. Like Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson series.
Yeah.
And, I think J.K. Rowling is very problematic, but I will admit that the Harry Potter series like had me in a death grip when I was a kid. It is what it is. Like it did inspire me to write. A problematic series, a problematic author, but that series did have me in a death grip when I was a kid before I knew about it.
The thing, it didn't even just have kids in a death grip. It had adults. It had adults.
Yeah.
And without going into her, and I hate saying that because it sounds like I'm dismissing it, and I'm not dismissing her issues or her stance, I should say, her stance on things. I'm not dismissing that at all. But she said she had children in a death grip and she had adults in a death grip to the point where the publishers had to release. I remember because I was working in a bookshop at the time. They had to release Harry Potter with adult covers on it. So it was just black and white of a train, and then you'd have the font. So adults would feel, because this is pre-Kindle. So adults
Yeah.
would feel comfortable sitting on the train and the bus reading the book and not have someone sitting opposite them wondering, why are you reading a children's book? And I think, it'd be amazing to have like not just a country, a nation, like the whole world
It
just
was the
in your
whole
pocket.
world, really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's literally the whole world. It's
So
crazy.
like I absolutely was inspired to write by, those book series and the Babysitter's Club and Sweet Valley High and all kinds of like books. But at the same time, I was also inspired by non-literary mediums. You know what I mean? Like I was inspired by video games. I was inspired by
Yeah.
movies. There's so many ways to tell a story. And I think instead of like when people dismiss certain things, like, oh, dismiss anime as, oh, you're a weeb, or that's geeky, or this is childish and stuff like that, you're missing out on a learning experience of how to tell stories, how to write really great characters, how to give them a great emotional arc, how to have, immense world building. Like the stuff that I'm usually into has crazy good world building. And it's like, wow, how did they do that? How did they accomplish creating this world that you can just immerse yourself in?
Were you ever daunted by that? By the world building when you're writing your fantasy books? Because when you're outside looking in, so when I'm reading fantasy stuff or sci-fi stuff and I'm like, oh my God, the world build, to me, it's so vast. And, it's every small detail to even what you may describe to call a type of tree. Like everything is so well thought out. And I think that can be it could be a daunting process, thing to grasp when you're outside looking in thinking, I want to write fantasy. Did you ever have that, or were you just quite easy going in?
I mean, world building is very difficult. It's tough. And I wrote fantasy from the beginning. The Queen's Spade is the only non-fantasy book that I've written. But it still requires a lot of research, right? Because it's sort of historical. So there's a kind of world building. You need to understand like what was the world like in 19th century London. But there's some references there. When you're writing fantasy, you're creating your own world. So it can be daunting because you want it to still make sense. Just because it's fantasy doesn't mean there aren't like internal rules, right? So for example, if who's that guy in Game of Thrones? Jon Snow, right? If Jon Snow,
I don't even know why I'm laughing. It's like, it's Jon Snow. I didn't even know you were thinking about Jon Snow. But when you say it, I'm like, why would you struggle with Jon Snow?
it was like, I don't know. I think because of that that ending and how it ended, I just kind of blocked it out of my memory.
Yeah.
Like,
We don't talk about that.
But we don't talk about it. But let me talk about it for a bit. It's like,
okay.
if Jon Snow like grew angel wings, in the series finale, I mean, it would be probably one of the less ridiculous things to happen that episode. But at the same time, it's like you would still be like, wait a minute, why is that happening? You feel cheated because it's not in the rules of the world that has been established that someone can just grow angel wings and fly away, right? So it's like the reader is also paying attention to your world building. They're paying attention to the rules that you've set up. And if you break your own rules, they'll feel cheated. They'll feel like, what's going on? They'll feel like they've been talked down to, and that breaks the immersion, right? They no longer feel like they're in this world. They're suddenly taken out of the world that you've created. So it's like, as a fantasy writer, you do have to create a world that has its own internal logic. And that can be tough. You got to put a lot of work into it. But it can also be really fun and rewarding because, the sky is really the limit in terms of like where you're getting your inspiration from and, how you see yourself in that world as a Black girl,
Because you have been writing fantasy in the past and now you're moving on to historical fiction. Do you feel that, and I'm saying because I will say there's not a lot of us writing. Well, you don't see us, but and the thing is, actually, no, that's wrong. We are writing. It's whether we're visible. I think that's the difference. But did you ever think it would? Did you know it would be a challenge, or were you just, I'm just going to write and just see what happens? I don't care about how it may look on the outside, and how few of us seem to be visible.
I knew it would be a challenge from the beginning. I mean, unfortunately, there are just, I mean, when I started, there weren't as many of us, right? Like I started writing, I published my first book in 2014, and the main character was meant to be Black, and they put a white girl on the cover, right?
No,
Yeah, that
they
happened.
did?
Yeah, because, you know, this whole idea like Black girls don't sell on the cover. And that,
But you know,
that
sorry to cut you, but I'm like, that's only 20. You're not talking about, I was like 1986. Like,
yeah.
you're talking
That was 10 years ago.
No, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It's
I
crazy.
was
It's so
so
crazy.
upset. I was so upset, but it really
You would
hasn't been
be.
that long. Pardon?
I said, but you would be. It would be. There's no way that you wouldn't be upset to see the character that you created just replaced with what's called an acceptable, I'm doing the air quotes, but an acceptable image.
Right.
It's like a rejection of you.
It is a complete rejection of me, and it really played head games with me. So it's like, because I also tried to publish a book at one point, and they were like, "Oh, I don't understand why the heroine is Black if the story isn't Black." You know what I mean? Like, this was just about a fantasy story of a young Black girl going on an adventure. And I guess they felt like they didn't understand why the main character had to be Black if the story wasn't about racism, or if the story, didn't have to do with what they saw as Black issues. Mind you, like vast majority of the people in the publishing industry are white. So what they think is a Black story is probably like something like police brutality, racial injustice. If it's fantasy, it has to be Afrocentric fantasy, like specifically to do with maybe Nigerian or whatever kind of like mythology and stuff like that. It can't just be like a Black girl with a werewolf or something like that. It has to be, you know what I mean? So there are so many barriers involved, and it really played head games with me until one day I said, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to write what I want to write. And, two of those book series got published. And I'm, in 2024, post-Trump re-election, I'm like, okay, a lot of these white editors and agents who said that they've had a come to Jesus moment, and they're all for like we're all for diversity now. Like they may end up going back to the old days of, we can't do diversity, so let's just go back to like white girls and pretty white girls with dresses on the covers. And it's like, you know what, you do whatever you want to do. I'm going to keep writing my Black girls, and I don't care.
Yeah, you can see me. You can see me fidgeting because I'm getting irritated, and I'm like, no,
I know.
no, because it's so, anyone listening to us, or when they do listen to us, I'm sure they're going to be thinking, well, that is just it. It's so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous, and then it will make sense as to why, at the beginning of this conversation, I was talking about the diversity report that came out in publishing, because you hear what I'm saying, the issue. You're like, oh, there's not enough stories, there's not enough Black editors, there's not this, there's not that. But when the opportunity is presented to you, fully formed, you have your author, you have your Black, you have your stories. And I'm going to say Black stories, but you have your stories with Black characters up front and center. But then you're saying, oh no, it doesn't fit into what your idea of Blackness is.
Right.
And I don't understand why Blackness needs to equate to suffering. Why can't it? I'm going back to my Jedi because I wouldn't mind being a Jedi, but why can't it equate to being a Jedi or a poorly aiming stormtrooper? Like, why? And you just think whether it's 2014 and you said fast track to now, present day, 2024, and people are banning books left, right, and center. like, just what's wrong with people? Just publish the stories.
That's why, exactly. That's why I say like this, it's nonsense when, it's the same publishers that are like, we don't know what to do. And it's like, you have the power. If you want to buy books from Black authors, you can do that. If you want to buy books about Black people, you can do that. If you want to not just buy those books, but really publicize them and market them to a wide audience and put your money where your mouth is, you can do that. You're just choosing not to do it. So at this point, it's kind of like, it's just we're going around in circles because the
It is,
people,
isn't it?
right? Because the gatekeepers know exactly what they can do and they don't want to do it. So it's no longer about like trying to figure out what they can do. They've already decided they're going to do what they want to do. So I'm going to do what I want to do, which is I'm going to continue to write my books. And however I want to publish them, I'm going to publish them. If a trade publisher does not want to buy it, then, maybe an indie publisher will, or maybe I'll self-publish it. Maybe I'll put it up on a website. Like there's so many ways to tell a story. Maybe I'll make a podcast.
Listeners, it's time for a very short break. If you're enjoying this conversation with Nadine Matheson and want to help keep the podcast going, why not buy me a cup of coffee? Your support goes such a long way in keeping these conversations flowing. Just check out the link in the show notes.
Yeah.
I think that's the beauty of where we are now, because there are so many options open to, and I'm not just saying us as in Black authors, I mean to like everybody. Whether you're white, Black, however you identify, there are so many options available to you. So if traditional publishing, you feel as though the doors are closed because they don't want to, and I said it's not even buy your story, because they can buy your story, they can buy, give you the 2-book deal, whatever, give you an amazing advance, they can give you all of that, but it means nothing if they're not going to put the work into promoting you and making you visible. So they can do all that. So, but right now you can look at it and be like, you know what? No, I'm going to move away from that, and I'm going to say try a smaller publisher, or I can self-publish. And I always say self-publishing is not an easy option at all. It takes hard work, but it's still an option open to you.
Right. Absolutely. Like, I don't think any of these options are easy. I mean, first of all, writing itself is hard. And I think, if you want to self-publish, you have to be very entrepreneurial. You have to be like on top of things. You have to know how to build your audience. Yeah. There's so many different things that you have to pay for. And there are different struggles when it comes to trade publishing or when it comes to being an indie publisher. If you want to make your own podcast, if you want to make your own website and upload things for free, like there's always going to be struggles. But, at the very least in this current era, we have so many different options. And hopefully there are people that are willing to like share advice. And that's one thing that like I'm really thankful for, because it's not a guarantee. I think that there are some authors, especially authors who tend to be like the big, really big best-selling authors. I don't know like what is going on, but I feel like sometimes they don't want to help, or like, I don't know if I should say this, but I find that like some Black big best-selling authors are like, nah, I got mine. You know what I mean? Like I got mine. So I don't really feel the need to like give you a hand up or like give you advice, et cetera, et cetera. Most of the help that I've gotten is from like, in terms of best-selling authors, have been people like that weren't Black, which is like a weird, like I'm still trying to like parse through that. Whereas like the Black people that have helped me have often been like, mid-list authors who are starting out, or authors who maybe aren't big, massive names, like stuff like that.
I think I can only put it down to, and I don't think it even is restricted to just be, just to like publishing and being an author. I think you can look at any profession, any profession in the world, and you'll always find someone who's successful. And I think there's a need to feel like they need to protect their space and their position. Yeah. And it's like they just feel that, there's not enough room. And there's more than enough room. You're gonna
There's
be
more than
fine.
enough. It reminds me of
Your place
like,
on the pedestal will be fine.
It reminds me a lot of like Gabrielle Union, the actress. She, I think a few years ago, gave a interview. Okay, you know what I'm talking about, where she
Yeah, I
was like,
do.
how Hollywood made her feel like she had to compete against every other Black actress for like a spot at the table, like to be the one, the
Mm,
top Black actress. And it's kind of like top Black actresses sometimes made to feel like they're pitted against each other and they have to like fight over, scraps to get that seat at the table. And like once you're at that really, really, really high level, you may want to, instead of helping more people come up to your level, it's more like, okay, I'm going to burn the bridge behind me so that I'll be like the token, top Black, actress. And unfortunately, there is that kind of dynamic also happening in publishing, where you'll have, not everybody, but you'll have like some Black authors that are like, well, I got mine. Like I got mine, so I don't really know like what your problem is. I don't really care, et cetera, et cetera. And it's so unfortunate, but that's why every single time there is an author, regardless of their race, sexuality, religion, blah, 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 any author that has given me advice, I've said to myself, like, that's a real one. That's
yeah.
a real, because that's somebody that is able to pay it forward and that wants to see more Black girls in the industry and that actually cares about like, you know, getting just more faces and like helping people who need it. So like if you're starting on your self-publishing journey, maybe there are people that can say like, oh, this is what I did. Here are some people that you can reach out to help and give you advice. If you're starting on your trade publishing journey, there are people that can say like, oh, this is a good agent. Oh, you shouldn't go to that agent. Or here are some things that you should negotiate for, this and that. That's really helpful. Or even people that will say like, oh, I'll do an event with you, and it'll
Yeah.
get you more visibility.
See, and I
That's like,
always feel, sorry, go
yeah.
on.
No, I was just going to finish off by saying like I've always been endlessly grateful for those people.
Mm.
And it's unfortunate that there's some people that are like, no, I got mine. So like, screw you, you're on your own.
But I always feel that you have nothing to lose by paying it forward. You have nothing to
Exactly.
lose by saying to someone, "Oh, like me, like people I've had, people authors who want to submit email me and go, "Will you mind and looking at my submission letter and my cover letter?" I'm like, I'm not losing anything by spending. Okay, I may lose time. I'm like, God, I need to be editing, but I'm not really losing anything in the long run by looking at someone's cover letter and saying, no, you should do A, B, and C and get rid of this paragraph and make sure you send it to the right person. I'm not losing anything from that. In fact, I said I will gain, because hopefully in the future they'll get signed on, they will get their publishing deal, and then I will see them like rightly claiming their space. And if they appear in the bestsellers charts with a success, I'm going to applaud them, because that's what you want. I'm not going to
Exactly.
lose anything from that.
Yeah, like I feel chills like when somebody comes up to me and say like, "Oh, you inspired me to do this and that." Like I feel chills because it's like, wow, something that I did matters. Like
Mm.
I did something that mattered to somebody else. And when somebody comes up to me, asks me like questions, like absolutely, I want to help. Like I've been mentoring and doing workshops in my sort of local community. And I do workshops, especially for people, we call it in Canada K to 12. So it's
Right.
like kindergarten, schools, like,
Oh, the babies. It's like
yeah,
cool.
the babies to grade 12. So about like when you're about to leave high school and stuff
Yeah.
like that. And also like I teach creative writing at a university level. So I'm always like, people that I see that really have what it takes. I'm like, here, like, my email address. Like if you have any questions, email me. I can, show you the ropes in terms of getting an agent, how to get an agent. I can help you craft your query letter and things like that. I can tell you like which editors are looking for what kind of stories and that, this and that. But paying it forward is literally like what I do as a profession, but it also like just fills me with so much joy. So when I'm kind of like looking for help and I'm like, can, is there somebody that can give me some advice? And if somebody's like, no, figure it out by yourself, or sorry, I'm too busy, and the stuff like that, I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I don't like, that person can do whatever they want. I can't control what other people do, but it is kind of like, kind of sad where
It
it's
is
like,
sad.
it is sad where I say like the majority of the biggest authors, like really big authors that have helped me, majority of them have been non-Black. And I'm just trying to figure that out where I don't know. I don't know.
It's a weird thing because it's like
So
you're
weird.
fighting against you're fighting against an establishment and you feel like you're fighting against your own people. You're like, for God's sake,
I know.
like what's wrong with
Like,
people?
guys.
Just come together. Sort yourselves
Right?
out.
Oh my God. It's something that I actually said in like a meeting that I had, that meeting that I talked about
Hmm.
where we were in like with other Black authors. And I felt like maybe I'm alone in this because I did get some pushback by a couple of people, but I was like, if we are upset about what traditional publishing and their white gatekeepers are going to do, I'm like, take a look at everybody in this chat right now. We can create our own readership. There's so much that we can create ourselves without having to constantly beg for approval from this white trade publishing system. We can create our own system. We can create
Yeah,
our
I
own readership. You know what I mean?
always I always find the pushback always comes from people who are scared of rocking the boat. Because
Exactly.
again, it comes to I need to protect my position. Whatever I've got, no matter how small it is, I need to protect it. When you were talking about, you cross the bridge and you burn it down. I don't know why in my head, my analogy was it's a zombie apocalypse and you've run into the safe house and, and then people are
Exactly.
running behind you and you're like, no, I have locked the door, barriers are down. I get my
Exactly.
samurai sword. I go to extremes. Yours is a bridge. Mine is a zombie apocalypse. But
But I
people
love
just
that. I love that
people,
because it does kind of feel like, okay, we're entering like the zombie apocalypse like era. I don't know if you saw like yesterday. I don't know when this episode is gonna be airing, but it was literally yesterday, or maybe it was on Monday. I can't remember. No, it was Tuesday. That Korea became a dictatorship again for the first time in 60
oh,
years.
when the president or prime minister he declared
Right,
martial law, and the people were
right.
like, "What are you talking about?"
Exactly. It was like for 2 hours or 3 hours,
Like,
Korea went back to being a
run.
dictator. I'm like, what is going on in the world? I'm like, the world is falling apart. I just heard something crazy went on like in France not too long ago.
Yeah, they did.
But
They
I
got
think
rid of Michael Barnier. I didn't
they
realize this was
needed
going
to
to be a
prime
political
minister.
episode.
Uh, uh, but I
But
was
the
just
world
saying, the kind of world that we're entering into, we can't afford to be like, well, I got mine, so screw
yeah.
you. Like we have like we're in this together. Especially if we want Black stories and like Black storytelling to survive in this current era, it's all hands on deck, you
We
know?
was talking about the zombie apocalypse and the world just being crazy. One of my brother who lives in Japan, with his kid, and he sent us a bunch of videos of the kids, and the youngest one is 2, and they got this playground in Japan, and
Mm,
so little Tato, my 2-year-old nephew, he's running around. He's having the best time of his life. But in this playground, they got like I can only describe it like smoke coming out of the ground, and it's completely messy. You can barely see him, but that's the thing. That's what they do in the playground, and the kids love it. And I can hear my brother saying, "Where is he? Where is he?" And then you see my little nephew like running in and out of shot, and suddenly he appeared. And all of a sudden, I heard my brother say, "It's like Silent Hill." And I just thought, you need. And I
oh
remember
my
thinking, you sent my 2-year-old nephew out into a zombie apocalypse. But I feel like you need those moments in life, but also
God.
you need those moments in the literature, the books you consume, you know, the films you consume, and you need to be able to feel free to create those moments. So you need to be free and happy to create your books and tell the stories the way that you want to tell them. And for universally, for people, like me, look at them, be like laughing or crying or saying, I too want to ride a spaceship. You need all of those moments, and it shouldn't be, I don't know, restricted by your ethnicity. And I think
Absolutely.
that's the most that's what gives us those roll the eyes moments and give it a side eye and just think, you get, as my brother's friend always says to me, you get very militant. I said, it's not even about getting militant. You're just like,
You
you just
just
want
get
to feel things.
frustrated.
Yeah, it's a frustration. I think that's what you're right. It's more frustration.
People don't, exactly. I hate the word can't. I say it again and again because, like you mentioned you had a brother in Japan. I went to Japan not recently, like 5 years ago. I loved it. It was like, finally, I'm here to the place that basically like inspired my storytelling. Because I truly say, if it weren't for Japanese storytelling, if it weren't for anime, manga, Japanese video games like Final Fantasy, Kingdom Hearts, that kind of thing, I wouldn't be the writer I am today. But
Yeah.
it also creates, like, if I could live in Japan, I think I would. But like, that's part of the reason why I'm so frustrated when people tell me, no, these are the type of stories that you can write. It's like, no, I want to write like a Naruto or Jujutsu Kaisen or a Cardcaptor Sakura, but just with a black girl as a lead. Why
Yeah.
can't I do that? Like that's what I grew up wanting to do. That's what I grew up being, um, being inspired by. So when it's like the American industry is like, oh no, we don't want those stories from you. It's just so incredibly frustrating. That's why you just gotta write what you want to write and find your audience.
Yeah.
However you're gonna find them.
Just tell your stories. I remember I was mentoring someone. I can't remember what genre of book they were writing, but they emailed me and they said, is it okay if, and it's the thing, it was weird being like, you don't need to ask for permission, but they were asking if it was okay for their character to be eaten. It was a set, and I'm sure it was okay for them to be eating plantain. And I was like, if that's what your character likes, if that's what they want to, and I'm saying plantain, not plantain, it's plantain to me. But if that's what your character likes, and that fits whatever it is going on with that in that part of the story, then just tell it. If your character wants to eat fish and chips, then have them do it. Don't feel like you need to make your character fit a certain idea of what they should be doing or should not be doing. Just do whatever you need to do. It's your story.
Right. I think in general, Black women, just in all spaces of our lives, are so restricted. And sometimes we do it to each other as well. Like sometimes Black communities do it to each other and say like, oh, your identity has to be this. You shouldn't be into these kinds of things. Like you shouldn't be into, comic books. You
How dare
shouldn't
you?
care. You shouldn't listen to this kind of music. I just did my Spotify rap, and I think Utada Hikaru is my like number one. She's my number one artist on Spotify.
The Spotify rap.
Yeah,
I see so many jokes about it, and it's like, we're not judging you, and you're like, no, you are judging me.
you are.
I feel like my Spotify, what I choose to listen to, especially when I write, because I have a whole writing playlist, and I can, when I was going through going through my Spotify Wrapped, and it was like, this is what you were listening to in November, and I was like, yeah, because I was writing, and I could feel like my whole musical taste just completely changed. And then it's like, don't judge me, but I feel as though you're judging me.
Exactly. Like, I think that Black girls, be yourselves. Be yourselves.
Yes. Everyone be yourself.
Yeah, everyone. But I say this message, like everybody be yourselves, but I say this message especially to Black women because I do feel like there are, so many expectations into like, oh, the kind of music you should listen to, you should be into the kind of like books that you should read, or even like the idea that Black people don't read books, right? Like there's still like all of these stereotypes that we're burdened with, this idea, oh, black people don't read books. What are you talking about? And it's like, no, you be who you are, you write what you want to write. And we will, especially in this era where it seems like everybody wants to silence our voices, we're not going to be silenced.
Mm. I see it, I see it myself. And I do so much eye rolling. If my eyes pop out of my head one day, I wouldn't be surprised. But and when we say about you're expected, or people assume you're going to write a certain type of book, and it's not just with publishers. I see it with, I would say, like with some Black bloggers and book clubs and stuff you see online. I'm like, why is that all you're promoting? Why is that what all you're putting your energy into? Can't you see there's a variety? You're right, we are writing in every single genre possible, and I feel like you should be doing a lot more to promote that, as opposed to reinforcing the viewpoint that there's only one type of story that can be written and be written well. So I have my own and I think I probably have my own frustrations as a Black crime writer, because I did a crime writers special for Black History Month, because ours is in October, and I did it. And before, obviously, I was trying to work out who's going to come on my podcast, I was putting together a list of Black crime writers in the UK, and I had like I'm sure it was like 15, and I'm thinking it can't just be 15, even with me included. And I emailed another writer and I said, have you got any more? And she gave me, I think, another 3. And that's when I came up with the number 18. I'm like, it can't just be 18 Black writers of crime in the UK. That is just ridiculous. So I have my own frustrations with that, which is why I feel that without naming names, certain organizations and certain bloggers need to be doing a lot better. Because then they'll be the first ones are, doing the post saying, look at this, there's a lack of diversity, but you need to do your bit as well.
Exactly.
Okay. Let me calm down. Let me ask you about your book, because that's what we need to talk about. I'm watching the time. I'm like, oh my God. But let's talk about Queen of Spades. How excited are you for Queen of Spades? And then you can tell the authors, you can tell the listeners of the conversation about Queen of Spades.
Yes. So the Queen Spade is actually the Queen Spade.
Sorry, Queen Spade. Sorry. I don't know why. I apologize. I just got carried away. The Queen Spade. That's what I have written down.
The Queen Spade, right. No, it's completely fine. The Queen Spade is published from HarperCollins, and it's kind of like, it's a historical revenge thriller. So it's kind of like Queen Charlotte, except if she's like out to kill everyone. Not kill, but just like destroy.
I don't know what's worse, kill or destroy. It doesn't sound any better.
No. But that's kind of like the main character is Sarah Bonetta, the African goddaughter of Queen Victoria. And, she has endured so many injuries, humiliation, being this goddaughter, having to assimilate to this sort of elite British crown, this British society, that she wants revenge against all of the people who took her from her homeland and basically took her to London to be this, pet and this propaganda tool, right, for the crown to sort of talk about like, oh, look how wonderful and altruistic and multicultural the British crown is. And, like colonialism is good and imperialism is good. Look how we can civilize the savage, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's like, she's like, okay, bet we're going to like go and get revenge against all these people who did this to me, took me away from my old life. So it's all about, Black female rage, but it's all about like, destroying the upper class, because for them, that kind of humiliation, that public humiliation, having your perfect little upper class life being torn asunder, having your reputation in tatters, all of that is so much worse than death. So that's kind of why she's scheming, because it would be easy just to kill everybody off. But she's like, no, like, I'm going to make you live in complete disgrace. So she's very much a schemer. She's very much, playing chess. Everybody else is playing checkers. She's out here just, and there are complications. There's romantic complications. The queen is out here trying to marry her off and send her back to Lagos before she can cause any more ruckus in Britain, before she can finish her revenge. And back then, of course, being a woman, someone, if the Queen of England is going to marry you off to someone, you can't really say no, right?
Yeah.
So she's on a timetable. She's like, okay, looking at a watch, like I got to destroy this people by like before my wedding day. But there are guys that she actually does like, and there are people that she's using, and people that are trying to destroy her and like counter revenge. So it's just like this whole web of intrigue, of court intrigue, and bloody thriller revenge, and it's a lot of fun.
And how is that a story that you do not want to read? I was thinking, right, when when you was talking about her being a pet, do you watch Invincible?
I've heard
Yeah,
of it. I've heard
oh
of,
God.
yeah, I know what you're gonna say.
It's there's a scene when Omni-Man he said he says to his son, he's talking about his wife, and the son's like, how could you do this to us? How could you do this to your family? Don't you love us? And he says to his son, yeah, like his wife, his child's mother. He's like, yeah, she's just a pet. And I remember the shock. If you saw the WhatsApp messages that ran around our group, he called his wife a pet. And it's like that outrage and the way he did it. So when you're talking about her being a pet, it's like, how dare you reduce a human being?
One of my friends told me about that. She watches the show. And I was like, ooh, I'm glad I never watched it.
It's such a scene. Obviously, it's so good. You need to watch it. But that's what came into my head. I was like, Omni-Man, just a pet. And I was like, nah, she's not going to take that. She's no one's pet. So exactly. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. No. So Sarah, your last set of questions. Are you an introvert or extrovert or a hybrid of the two?
I'm definitely an introvert. I gain more energy being by myself, but I know how to turn it on when I have to turn it on. Like when I'm in a group of people, I know how to like talk and like, like I'll probably be the chattiest person there, but it does take a lot of energy out of me.
Yeah,
it does.
So what challenge or experience in your life shaped you the most? And I feel like I have to caveat it now by saying it can be a good or a bad experience.
Okay. Because my mind automatically goes to like the bad stuff.
That's what I know people doing. They're like, oh my God, you want trauma? I'm like, no, I don't need trauma. It can be a good thing. It can be a good challenge or experience.
I think writing my dissertation was a challenge, I was writing about, Black people and race and this and that, colonialism, but it took me 5 years to complete it.
Wow.
And, I had gone through a lot before then because, when I was growing up, it was all about you had to be a medical doctor because everybody sort of in our sort of group, like all of the fathers were doctors and they all expected their children to be doctors. So when I didn't make it into medical school, I felt like such a failure, So I kept I tried being a lawyer. I took the LSAT. I didn't even want to be a lawyer, but I was just like, okay, my parents' expectations, like what are their expectations for me? So I took the LSAT. I tried to get into pharmacy. I tried to do a bunch of things.
Wow.
And I just ended up in English because it all came down to what do you love to do? And I love to write and read. So I ended up just kind of following that path all the way to grad school, did my dissertation. It was a massive, challenge, but by the end of it, I think I found who it was that I wanted to be. And I'm living that life now. So
it's amazing how you can tie yourself up in knots trying to fit other people's expectations. And in your hearts of hearts, deep down in your soul to your feet, that's not who you are and who you're meant to be. But you tie yourself up in knots, doing the mental gymnastics, just trying to conform to someone else's expectations. And then until you reach that moment of, no, I'm wearing the wrong shoes. That's the only way I can equate it. You're wearing the wrong shoes. It doesn't fit. But you're a doctor now. Exactly. And I bet they're very proud because they'll say, my daughter's a doctor.
Right, right. So I got there in the end, right? It's just a different kind of doctor. I'm still dealing with that whole thing of like expectations, like in my culture, it's like you've got to be married and have your first kid before you enter your 30s. You know what I mean? And it's like there's still that expectation, like, when are you going to get married? When are you going to get married? When are you going to have a
Mm,
kid? Blah, blah. And it's like, I don't know if that's what I want. So I'm still like fighting against that in a way. But and then the more I hear from other people, like, you know what, you just live how you want to live.
yeah.
I think the more courage I get. But I don't know.
There's no
I'm still.
normal. I mean, that's the thing. That's the way you need to look at it. It's like what people think of is normal. There is no normal. So you shouldn't
Mhm,
try to fit into what other people think is normal. We create
mhm.
our own, I don't know why I suddenly turned into a therapist, but we create our own norms. But we
I'm
do.
sitting down, I'm lying down on your shade
On my Shay
and
Lounge.
listening. Yes,
No,
exactly.
you have to, because I just think it can be a miserable way to live if you're just trying to fit into what other people think you should be doing and how they think you should be. And there's so
Hmm.
many people, I don't, no one wants to have regrets in life. And thank God you don't have to look back at yourself. You have the books you've written, you're doing the things that you want to do. But I understand, if you're going to the weddings and the aunties are not even asking you about your book, you want them to say, "Oh my God, how's your book going? What are you working on next?" No, "Oh, where's your husband? Where's yours, Auntie
Exactly.
Mildred?" That's what I would say.
Exactly. It's crazy. It's like no matter what you achieve, it's always going to be like, but where's your husband?
Ask them where theirs are, because I'm sure there's a story there and they're not talking about it.
But a lot of people like they have husbands and like they don't, like none of them have good
This is
experiences.
what I'm saying. There's a story, and if you ask
There's
them to
a
tell you,
story.
they're not going to tell you. So yeah, next time someone
Exactly.
says that, if you feel brave enough, ask
I
them.
don't know if I feel brave enough. In a Nigerian household. I don't know about
Yeah,
that.
I don't know why I'm running my mouth because I probably would turn away too.
Exactly.
Okay, if you could go back to when you were 25 years old and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
It would be um don't listen to anybody. Like don't worry. Like you're on the right track. Just live
Yeah.
the life that you want to live. And don't waste any time, any emotion, feeling bad or feeling ashamed because you're not living up to other people's definition of normal. Because you're achieving great things.
Do you know it's funny? I had an earlier conversation this morning, yeah, because I recorded a podcast this morning, and I asked, because I always ask the question, what would you tell your 25-year-old self? And she said exactly the same thing. She would
Oh
tell her
wow.
25-year-old self, keep going, just keep doing what you're doing. You're doing okay. And I thought that's a good thing to hear at 25.
I wish I had heard it.
Yeah.
But I mean, if there's any 25-year-olds listening right now, like this is this is it. Like I'm telling you, don't waste any time or emotions feeling ashamed because you feel like, oh, I should be doing this. Other
Mm,
25-year-olds are doing this. Who cares what other 25-year-olds are
yeah,
doing? You live your life.
exactly. Before we go, what's next for you? What are you working on next?
Well, I am working on the companion novel to The Queen's Spade.
Are
So I'm
you?
really excited.
That's
Yes,
cool.
I can't give the title just yet, but I'm really excited about The Queen's Spade, like coming out January 14th, and then having a companion novel in 2026. So I'm happy about that. I'm also working on a novel that's kind of like IP work, which is like
Yeah.
when people, like it's not your property, but you're kind of doing a story in somebody else's world. Like a lot of people do it for comic books and things like that.
Yeah.
So I'm writing about a book about a comic book Black heroine named Livewire, who is kind of like in the Valiant comic universe.
That's so
Um,
cool. I think that's the cool. I think
yeah,
that's out of anything. I'm like, that's cool.
that's cool. I know. And I just saw the cover and I'm like, oh, she looks so like, she looks preppy but powerful. And like, I'm happy about that. So that should be out in 2025 as well.
That no,
So
that is very cool. That is good to
Yes.
hear. All
So
right,
I'm
and
very
finally, Sarah, I forgot to ask, where can listeners of the conversation find you online?
So my website is www.sarahraughley.com. That's www.sarahraughley.com. I was on Twitter, but everybody knows what happened there. So I'm not really on Twitter that much anymore. But I am on Instagram at S_Raleigh. And I'm on Blue Sky and Threads.
How am I
So
following you on Blue Sky?
am
I
I
can't remember.
are you what are you? You're on Threads
I'm just
as
I'm just Nadine Matheson on Blue Sky. I need to find. I'm sure I'm following you. If not, I will be.
I see you right now, so I'm going to follow
Oh,
you
okay. I just
right
couldn't
this moment.
remember. That is good to know.
Right this moment.
Well, Sarah Raughley, it just leaves me to say thank you so much. And I really enjoyed our conversation. So thank you so much for being part of the conversation.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I really enjoyed this conversation as well. And it was pretty therapeutic. So maybe you have a future in, in giving people. I always think that like authors talking to each other and giving each other advice and just letting each other know like, hey, I've been there and this is how I'm
Yeah.
feeling. It's really affirming. It's really affirming. So you're not alone in feeling what you're feeling. So very, very thankful for that.
Thank you so much for listening to today's conversation with Nadine Matheson. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Be sure to tune in every Tuesday for a brand new episode featuring more amazing guests. Don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a review. It really helps the podcast grow. And if you'd like to support the show, you can buy me a cup of coffee or sign up on Patreon. The links are in the show notes. And if you'd love to join the conversation as a guest, feel free to send an email to theconversation@nadinematheson.com. Thanks again for your support, and I'll catch you next time.